processes and some of the issues that were considered. Projects referred to as the Veteran Affairs Healthcare Center, also sometimes referred to as the VA Medical Clinic. It involves a plan development permit and a precise plan of design. The project is located at 26001 Redlands Boulevard. It's a 36.9 acre site. It's consistent with an area referred to as Parcel 1 of map number 19018, and it lies within Special Planning Area D. Currently the site is vacant and undeveloped. It's an overview of the project plan. The medical clinic development is intended for outpatient services. This is a build-to-suit development that will be for lease. It's it's privately owned and constructed and will be operated and maintained by the Loma Linda Limited Corporation there. And this is a component of the Walsh Group, construction group. But the facility will be leased and occupied by the Veterans Affairs and used for a healthcare center. The initial term for the lease is 20 years. Just some rough statistics for the project. Overall, we have 345,000 gross square feet within a 125,000 square foot building footprint. The facility will be 3 stories, totaling approximately 60 feet in height. There will be over 2,000 parking spaces provided, and as I mentioned before, the overall project site is 36.9 acres, and within that will be included an approximate 5.5 acre linear park. This is an overview of the site plan. So conceptually, this shows all the components of the project. I believe you have copies of these plans. There's a legend on here with various numbers throughout the components of the site that give you a little more detail, but I'll walk through some of these for you. Some of the key aspects and components of the site plan are the fact that we have within this roughly square but somewhat irregularly shaped site a centrally located building that's surrounded on all sides pretty much by surface parking. We have a perimeter linear park along Bryn Mawr and Redlands Boulevard. And within the project, internal to the project site, we have other various site amenities. And I'll be talking about those as well. Access to the site is by 5 vehicle access drives. There's 2 primary access points for visitors and secondary access points for visitors as well at these locations here, one off of Redlands and the other one off Bryn Mawr. We have separate access intended for staff and service. One would be the shared access off Redlands Boulevard, and the other is at the southern edge of the property off Bryn Mawr. And then we have multiple pedestrian access throughout the site. The pedestrian access generally align with the main driveway areas, but in addition, we have a primary pedestrian access central to the Redlands frontage, referred to as the promenade. Just briefly on the building orientation, within the Special Planning Area D and along Redlands Boulevard, according to the East Valley Corridor Specific Plan, there's generally a desire to try and locate buildings closer to the street frontage. However, given the nature of this project, it's being a large institutional use, it's a very large project site. We're talking about a single-use building. This plan has been designed with the building to be centrally located. Each one of these green circles represents a quarter-mile radius. And this demonstrates how, with multiple accesses to the building, how within a quarter-mile radius we are able to access large areas for parking. So by centrally locating it, the visitors are able to have more convenient access to parking and accessing to the building. In addition, there were certain requirements dictated through Veterans Affairs Department of Veterans Affairs having to do about security for the project site, requiring minimum setbacks from major roadways for security purposes, and maintaining a certain radius around the building. It also dictated how certain driveways could come into the project site with relative juxtaposition to the buildings. And so that was a main features that dictated the location of the building within the project site. This is a close-up then of the building footprint area. You can see there's a lot of detail around the building itself. And the building is designed as 4 wings, each with a dedicated use. This allows for easier wayfinding within the project site. It allows for people, if they know what area that they're going to be able to park in a vicinity that's closer to the facilities that they're going to need, perhaps. But even so, you'll see as we get into some of the internal circulation, that's not all that critical because that building offers multiple access. So for visitors, there's 3 primary access into the building. Again, accessible from all the visitor parking surrounding that, and then a primary staff access toward the back of the building. The project also includes various outdoor amenities. In particular, one of the key features, and you've seen this on some of the photos, is this a large fountain water feature with a memorial walkway bridge passing over that. And this forms as an anchor to the pedestrian promenade, which links the water fountain feature to Redlands Boulevard. In addition, there are several outdoor plaza areas and dining areas and seating areas. These are 2 examples. There's also gardens, integrated, and outdoor sitting areas for just an opportunity to be outside or for reflection and contemplation. There's also 2 other water features proposed, duck ponds. We have a small duck pond here toward one of the primary entrances and one at the southeast corner of the project. And then finally, there's also internal, we have some trailway systems built in within the parking area so that there's an opportunity for site visitors and staff to access the building by using pathways. It's a nice alternative feature to just walking the pavement or a sidewalk, so it's set up as a trail system just to offer some variety within the site. In addition, around the building, we have various functional features. There's a lot of green space there that appears to be unused for other uses, but it actually functions as a security perimeter with a 25-foot setback from the building, and also allowing access for emergency and fire vehicles if necessary. And then in addition, we have a detention pond off to the rear. And I'll point out, too, that the loading dock area is here toward the west end of the building with mechanical yard areas. Overall, in addition to the amenities around the perimeter of the building that I pointed out, the site is set up really to incorporate and integrate a lot of public and private open space throughout the project site. Some of the key open space elements include, again, the linear park, which has a contiguous pedestrian walkway throughout it. And the linear park is actually can be looked at as a couple different zones. We have the Redlands Boulevard frontage. We have what's called the referred to as the orchard feature here between the 2 main entrances, and then an active use zone. And I'll be talking more about those. And then in addition, the other primary one is the pedestrian promenade, again leading from the fountain area all the way up to the Redlands Boulevard and connecting and intersecting with the linear park. Just a little detail of what some of those outdoor active use areas will be. And first of all, I'll mention that the linear park is intended for public use. Let me step back. The facility will be fenced on the edge of this linear park area, so that there'll be security fencing separating the public area from the internal private use area. So the entire linear park is intended for public use and will be open and available 24 hours a day. So along the Redlands area, there's an intent to utilize berming and raised nodes just to create a little variety within the landscape, create some sense of privacy for users within the park. So here's some examples of some of those features that will be integrated along here to add some depth to the area and just interest, and the path will meander through that. Within the orchards areas between the two primary entrances off Bryn Mawr, there's an intent to plant this area almost to reflect and be reminiscent of the orange groves that serve the area. It'll provide a lot of shade, just a different type of atmosphere and outdoor use feel area. And then just south of that, at the southern end of the project, we have what's referred to as the active use area. And associated with that, we have a parking area off here that can be used by park users without having to actually go into the fenced, past the gated area into the facility. So there's not a need to park on the street. There'll be parking there. And this active use area will include, some examples are perhaps bocce ball or some chess tables or some horseshoes. The idea is to make it more of a social gathering place with activities. And the pedestrian promenade serves a couple purposes. One is it provides a focal point for directing the user to the front of the building, so it's a connection between the street and the entrance of the building. So even though the building is set back, you have this strong pedestrian connection that draws you into the site. And it's fairly wide and well landscaped with lots of seating areas along it, so it is reminiscent of a nice park-like plaza atmosphere. And as you pass through the parking area, again, within this is an example of what the park-like atmosphere in that area would look like. And you approach then the fountain. As you go over the fountain, there's a memorial bridge. An example is an example of what it may look like as you then start to approach the canopy and entrance leading into the building. Internal access and parking. The site plan includes, as I mentioned, over 2,000 parking areas, and the parking is set up in zoned areas to accommodate visitors and staff and to provide those, to segregate those areas so that the flow of traffic can be managed better and security can be managed better. There's coordinated traffic flow within the design. There'll be shuttle service provided. Everything is set up with various opportunities for accessible access. Bicycle circulation and bicycle parking are incorporated, as well as a strong pedestrian orientation. So I'll walk through some of those examples. Just briefly, this shows the areas in blue, for example. Outlined in blue are for visitor parking, whereas those areas shown in red are for staff. So again, it's segregated by the way that the driveways are set up. Staff entrance and service entrances down here, so that they are directed to park within these areas, and they really can't go into visitor parking and vice versa. Don't know what happened there. There we go. just jumped ahead on me. Try this. Okay. And in terms of pedestrian and accessible orientation, again, a lot of detail has gone into this with numerous wheelchair accessible areas from accessible parking. This is a major accessible parking lot here. Accessible parking is provided near all the entrances, and then pathways allowing access from that. Also, there'll be a shuttle service that runs through the parking area to provide an opportunity to pick up visitors and bring them to the entrance and drop off areas of the building for those that are either unable or choose not to walk. There's a lot of care taken to pedestrian crossings internal to the project site to ensure that pedestrian traffic is not in conflict with the flow of vehicles. And there's also been some thought given to bicycles, bicycle use and bicycle access to the site. This shows one possible primary, or two possible entrance areas in for bicycle leading to bike parking areas. Bike parking areas are located throughout the perimeter of the building. In addition, in the conditions of approval, we've added that a bicycle entrance also be provided in the vicinity of this driveway and integrated into one of the pathways to, again, provide for safe access to the parking area. You can see that there's also bicycle parking provided off into the linear park. Architectural design. There's a lot of detail on this. I'm going to flip through a lot of pictures and give you an idea of the sense of the concepts, some of the concepts that were embraced into the design. There's a lot of symbolism and detail. One of the, as I mentioned, one of the key concepts originally was to set the building up rather than one large building, to break it up into several smaller wings and to provide kind of some interest, and this allows again for wayfinding and some sense of organization within the building, within finding your way. And also then the plan looked at trying to further embrace that concept by using different materials and different styles for each one of those wings, so that you have a concept of one large unified project, yet some identity to each of the individual areas. And this provides a perspective then of what those wings would look like placed into the grounds. There were various items used for influencing the design. One was to reflect the symbolism of the veteran affairs and the veterans themselves, and to take this concept of the metals and the bars and to kind of mimic that within the overall design structure. Have a sense of pattern and bars throughout. Also, to reflect the historic nature of the area, they chose to bring in an architectural style that's referred to as the commercial style, in part because it also relies along utilizing a strong horizontal line with a lot of window use, which also mimics the pattern of the metal bands. And here's some examples then of how the commercial style, general examples off to the left, then have been integrated into elevations of the project. It gives a very structured look with a lot of use of windows. And again, it also brings in the strong horizontal component. The architect also tried to incorporate materials and elements that are reflective of the historic character of Loma Linda. And so there's a lot of use of stone and lighter colored materials and just trying to reflect the rural nature of the area as well. And so overall, this is what we end up with in terms of project elevations. Again, the facility is is 3 stories in height, and have a variety of use of window treatment and glass and color and patterns throughout. And then this is how this ultimately would look more in a built-out perspective. The design also takes into account energy conservation, energy efficiency, and also because it utilizes a lot of window treatment areas and glazing, consideration for how to place and incorporate those to minimize glare as well as overexposure from the sun. And this basically reflects how the design, again, tried to incorporate as much window space as possible on certain aspects of the project so that within the building there's a strong sense of natural daylight being brought into the building. Some examples of, again, the pedestrian and exterior area. And even though we aren't really looking at the internal of the building, I just wanted to point out within the building itself, as you may recall from one of the earlier slides, there's multiple entries into the building, and they all lead toward a central core that's centralized between the 4 wings. And this provides a nice open plaza area that allows people to get oriented into the facility, and from there they can go to whatever area they need to. So within here, though, they are looking at doing again, recognizing the veterans and the various services. And it's just a very kind of open plaza type feel with a lot of texture and color and interest. And brings us back to what are we actually doing here. We are looking at a plan development which includes a couple components. That is the development plan itself, so the physical plan that we just looked over, the development standards, the details that go into the specifics such as dimensions for parking areas, setbacks, and then the conditions of approval, additional items that are required to make sure that the project runs and is maintained smoothly. And the plan development is implemented through a precise plan of design as well as a zone change. So the precise plan of design, again, will cover the elements I had listed here, and then the zone change actually is necessary to put the PD symbol after the zoning, and that is what ultimately implements this. In addition, the project required environmental review under the California Environmental Quality Act, for which a mitigated negative declaration was prepared. So for the plan development, overlay, and zone change, this represents parcel 1. And the current zoning is East Valley Corridor from the specific plan, special development. And the PD application will apply just to the project site for the veterans facility. And the only change really is that the zone actually remains the same, just the PD symbol will now be placed after that to tie the development plan to this project site. Precise plan of design includes several aspects: the site plan layout, the landscape concept, the parking and access plan, the building design, and the land uses are all then tied to that. Just a brief history. You may recall last year we went through a process for which we established a Phase 1 concept area, and that was initiated through Lewis Investments, who currently owns that property and some of the surrounding property. Through that process, we realigned some of the parcels to consolidate and create this larger Parcel 1, which is how we ended up calling it Parcel 1, and that was through the parcel map process, and did a zone change to bring the zoning to align with the new parcel designations. And then we did a general plan amendment at that time to pave the way for this Phase 1 development, knowing that there was a possibility that this project would be coming forward. It also included extension of the Bryn Mawr Avenue south of Redlands. So these are probably familiar. Again, this is what we had looked at last year in terms of reconfiguration of parcels and then adjusting the zoning to create this Parcel 1 that we're now working with within that area. The parcel map was created, and this is the improvement plan that I'll come back to in a moment. But this improvement plan takes the large square area, provides for the extension of Bryn Mawr south to the southern end of the project site, and creates two separate parcels within this square. And as part of that Bryn Mawr Avenue extension that was previously approved, it provided for roadway improvements, not only for the extension, but along the frontage of Redlands as well. And as part of that and the cross-section for the roadway, it established a trail along the northern side of the project site, as well as street landscaping. So there are certain aspects of the Bryn Mawr Avenue improvements that are integrated along the perimeter of the linear park as well. So I just bring that to your attention. So again, as the linear park here, you can see how some of these improvements kind of overlap along the edge of that. So in reviewing the project, there are several city-adopted plans that were considered and evaluated, for which the project was evaluated against. And these include the general plan, the policies for special planning area D, the general plan community design element, in particular those for institutional uses, the East Valley Corridor specific plan, and the historic overlay for the Mission District. On that Mission District, early on the project was taken to the Historical Committee for review and certificate of appropriateness. And although the committee had a preference for craftsman style, that really didn't work for this type of institutional project, and that's why they ended up going with the commercial storefront style that was outlined before. There was a request that the design incorporate local history into the site plan and building style, and examples of that include the incorporation of stone walls or stone whenever possible, and to do something to reflect the history of the citrus groves. And the applicant has done that, for example, by setting up this orchard-type landscape element at the entrance to the project. So although it's not orange trees, it's still a grove type of arrangement that is reminiscent of what had existed in the past on the site. And again, the use of natural stone, for example, along the memorial wall. For special planning area D policies that are located in the general plan, there's a long list of policies, but really the essence of what applies for this site is the land use allocation from the infamous Table 2B, and the desire for street orientation, building height limit to 3 stories, maximum FAR, floor area ratio of 0.5. the requirement that this all be comprehensively planned, and that the project incorporate project amenities and visual interest, and finally, a strong need for a strong direction for pedestrian orientation and character. And, of course, then, any project is required to provide for its fair share of services and infrastructure improvements. So in evaluating the project, I'll just go through this briefly. You may recall this table from last year. For Phase 1, the general plan amendment for Phase 1 looked at incorporating institutional uses and the balance of uses as being considered retail mixed use. The proposed project is, although it's referred to as a healthcare facility, it's an institutional use, but it's also medical offices and other office and administrative uses. So it qualifies for the combination of uses that were set forth in Table 2B. In addition, for Phase 1, we had looked at the need to provide roadway and trails, which are actually provided, although not within the project site itself, but as part of the Bryn Mawr extension, meets that requirement for this area. And then finally, the need to incorporate parks and open space. And currently, with a 5.5-acre linear park, the project is close to meeting the overall requirement. I will point out that Phase 1, in terms of this land use allocation, is not only the VA project site, but also that remainder portion that's north of the roadway extension, which is not currently part of the development. So there's still opportunity to incorporate park. But even so, having said that, because I have a feeling Lewis Holmes is going, what? The VA project also includes a fair amount of, within its landscaped area internal to the site, passive recreational use area, which is counted toward meeting this requirement as well. So overall, the VA project meets this requirement and actually exceeds it for the requirement for Table 2B, according to Table 2B. So again, I think I just explained that. We've got the off-site trails, the linear park meeting the bulk of the park and open space requirement, as well as the internal uses, and the land uses are consistent. The project does not exceed the maximum of 3 stories, so we're consistent there. The project offers a floor area ratio of 0.22, so we are under the maximum 0.5 FAR. Through the plan development process, the project has been comprehensively planned. And the project does provide plazas and parks throughout internal to the site, and provides various visual interests not only through the architecture, but through the variety of open space facilities and recreational uses. Some examples of those are, again, the use of landform features to provide a variety of depth and interest within the park area, water features throughout the project site, gardens, and the active use area down at the southern end. Again, visual interest is brought in by the selection of materials and variety, and interesting architecture. Also, I'll mention that along the southern and western perimeter of the site, there'll be what is referred to as a green screen, and this is going to be a wire mesh fence planted with a deep landscape hedge, so that it functions as a wall, but it's actually a vegetation screen.
How high is that?
The conditions require that it be a minimum of 6 feet high, so it's 6 feet high. The fence is 6 feet, and then the hedge will have to be 6 feet and 3 feet deep and maintained in that manner. The project does incorporate a strong pedestrian orientation and character, not only with the various pedestrian linkages, but by incorporating a lot of seating areas throughout, and plazas, outdoor plazas, and various outdoor use areas. And again, we see that pedestrian orientation through the thoughtful design of the parking and access areas. Another aspect that was reviewed is the community design element of the general plan, specifically for institutional development. And the key aspects required out of that are highlighted here, and that is the manner in which vehicular access is provided, that it be that it be provided off a collector road rather than a main arterial, and that it be safe and efficient design. Again, the emphasis on pedestrian access, which overlaps with what we saw for Special Planning Area D, that it be sensitive to adjacent uses, complementary design, architectural detail, pedestrian scale, and again, integrate amenities throughout. So the primary entrances, again, are off of Bryn Mawr, which it is off the main access area, or off the collector road versus a arterial. We have an organized design throughout with a strong pedestrian character. And the community design element for institutional uses also allows for a fair amount of flexibility in the design of institutional uses, recognizing that because of the nature of what they are, they often need some, you can't always dictate in advance what the design should be, since there needs to be flexibility to accommodate what the specific use is going to be. And ultimately the site plan is thoughtful and reflects an efficient use and organization for what's being proposed on there and for the visitors that will be using the site. And then finally, we have the East Valley Corridor specific plan and the plan development process. And within the East Valley Corridor specific plan, there is the development standards, the community development standards. And currently, the project will comply with all of those standards with the exception of the green screen, or exception of a masonry wall along the west edge. And that's been replaced with the green screen, providing the equivalent of what the masonry wall could provide in terms of buffering that from the adjacent apartment complex off to the west. So through this development approval process, these development standards would apply and be part of the development standards that are ultimately tied to the project through the plan development. And then, as I mentioned, we had to do environmental review through CEQA, and an initial study was prepared, and the city determined that a mitigated negative declaration was required. And this was circulated on March the 14th, went through a 20-day public review period, which closed on April the 2nd, and no public comments were received. The conclusions of the initial study, MND, are that all impacts would be reduced to less than significant with implementation of the recommended mitigation measures. Mitigation measures were recommended to assure that impacts related to biological resources, cultural resources, and hazardous materials would remain less than significant in the event that unknown resources or hazards were encountered during project construction. So, in other words, there were no known hazards or resources located on the site, but in the event that something wasn't covered during construction, mitigation measures are in place to ensure that impacts would be less than significant. Otherwise, based on the project's assumptions used for this project, including the assumption that city and agency regulations would be would apply and would be followed, and that best management practices would be used, and based on an understanding of the standard conditions of approval, all other impacts were already reduced to less than significant. And finally, with regard to Measure V, the project is already required to pay its fair share to cover 100% of its infrastructure, facility, and services costs. So the initial study also determined that because these fees will be paid, there would be no additional impact above and beyond due to the project with regard to infrastructure and services. And traffic is always a concern, especially with a project of this scale. So a detailed traffic study was prepared by Koonsman and Associates, who are here tonight if you have any questions specific on the traffic to respond to those. The project was assumed, the project will be initiating construction this year, if approved, with a targeted opening date of 2016. A future traffic year of 2035 was considered to look at a worst-case cumulative build-out scenario. And 21 intersections were studied, and the traffic study determined that without improvements that these 11 study intersections could be negatively impacted. However, because of the requirement to pay development impact fees that apply toward regional improvements set forth in the county's off-site improvement plan, these impacts would be adequately mitigated. And this table here reflects what is anticipated in terms of the level of service, LOS. So under a no project scenario in 2016 when the project opens, this is kind of the starting point without the project actually being occupied. This is the level of service. We have the PM or AM.
Can you define that chart a little more clearly? PM 35.5/D. I don't know what that means.
Yeah, I'll do that right now. So this is the code up here, the key. So the PM, or this would be PM or AM, reflects the peak hour that was used. So usually the higher traffic volumes are either in the morning or in the evening during the main business hour commutes. So in this particular case, for most of the study intersections, it's the PM peak hour. But here at California and Redlands, for example, the AM peak hour is the more impactive or heavily affected hour. So that's what that's intending. The delay is a ratio used to describe as a reference point, and then that then is gauged to determine what the level of service would be. A level of service A is considered the highest, and a level of service F is considered failing. So even without the project, we have several intersections that are already operating at very low levels of service. Then applying future traffic conditions and looking at year 2035, this is an example of the project then in without these regional improvements that are covered through the impact fees. So you can see that in several situations, for example, at Mountain View and I-10 freeway, we have a situation where the project then is bringing about a reduced level of service, taking it from current beginning level of C down to level of service F. And then this third column off to the right here then is with the recommended improvements in place, those would be those improvements for which the project is paying its fair share, then where that brings the final level of service. And in all cases, you can see that the level of service is brought back up to at least the existing level, starting level at 2016, and in some cases improved. So, for example, at Enterprise Drive, and Bryn Mawr with the new signal going in, will have improved levels of service.
I don't want to cut you off. I do have some other questions regarding traffic, but I don't know if that's going to be in front of the engine when the engineer shows up. But are you going to go into a little bit of detail? For example, at the Mountain View off-ramp, you showed that the improvements would bring it to a C. Can you specify what those improvements would be to keep it at a C?
Yes, what happening is they have to pay part of regional transportation fund.
No, I understand that. I'm just curious as to what improvements would actually take place in order to bring it to a C.
They're not going to be the one who do it. It'll be Sandbag that doing it. So they will pay, I think it was $5.5 million for the regional transportation.
Yeah, I actually wanted to know what the improvements are. Yeah.
Have it yet.
So it's conceptual?
Ultimately, there will be some restriping, lane changes, and lane movements and turn pockets at Mountain View as part of the redesign of that Mountain View intersection, and that's what they're paying to that regional fee for.
So the traffic study associated with this particular project does not identify specifics of the actual improvement?
No, that would be part of Sandbag that they have to redo the off-ramp and on-ramp at the
Well,
at the
but that's
interchange.
just the off-ramp. I was talking about some of the other intersections that are actually in Loma Linda, like Mountain View and Barton Road. What improvements are we making to that to make it, keep it at a D? I'm just curious. And I don't know if that's something that the traffic engineer or folks can answer at later point, but I didn't want to cut you off. I just had
I think it's best to, I'm almost complete
That's
with
fine.
this
Go ahead.
presentation,
Sorry,
and
go
then Carl Ballard could come up and perhaps provide some more detail.
Before you move on that, though, Jarb, I'm not sure I understand. It sounds like Councilman Popescu understands how the money works, but when I don't. So when they pay 100% of the development impact fees, where does that money go? And is that a standard percent? And then how is it drawn on later?
Yes, as part of development impact fee, there's different pot of money. For example, there will be regional transportation that pretty much managed by Sandbag for the freeway improvement and the interchange. Okay, the fee is based on the nexus study that Sandbag did to come up with a cost estimate, how much it's going to cost for each interchange. Where the $5.5 million coming from is they calculate the number of traffic that were coming in to use this facility, and that kind of ratio that they use for number of vehicles that will come in, go through the intersection, or in this case can be Mountain View and I-10 or California and I-10, and that portion will pay for that improvement percentage.
But the total development impact fee is $5.5 million?
No, that's only regional. The total is a lot more than that.
Well,
so and then in addition to regional, they had to pay the traffic circulation fee. So that is and the local 1.4 for the local, 1.4 for local transportation impact fee. They had to pay the storm drain impact fee, water, sewer, storm drain. So all of that they had to pay.
Then they're doing about $700,000 of work relative to on-site, in addition to, I believe it's somewhere in the $5 million range to extend storm drain and Bryn Mawr down in front of their project. So there's
Is that
specific.
money accounted for in different places?
Yes.
So there's essentially three pots: the regional pot, the local pot, which are development impact fees, and then the mitigations that and the work they actually physically have to do. Tied to their projects. So they'll be putting in traffic signals at Bryn Mawr, building a road, building Bryn Mawr down, extending the storm drains, putting in medians down Redlands Boulevard so you can't make crazy lefts and rights and U-turns in front of there. So there's I believe there's some striping at California and some lane realignment at California. And
That's current. That's not what...
That's what they will have to do before they're allowed to open.
Right. But there will still be buckets of money to draw on as the impact increases over the years that they're describing.
Right. As the rest of Area D develops and things south of Area D develop, everybody pays their little bit of that
And
in
who
addition
accounts
to
for that?
these guys.
Sandbag or city, or it goes to different?
There is a regional that Sandbag
Local.
accounts for and a local that the city accounts for.
Okay. Thank you.
So that's where we stand on the traffic level of service. Again, demonstrating that impacts and improvements will bring level of service back up to as required under Measure V. The traffic study, figure 29, toward the end of the traffic study, identifies traffic mitigation and project improvements for off-site as well as on-site. And I haven't listed the on-site ones here, which deal with recommendations for striping internal to the project site. But basically a requirement to improve Bryn Mawr and the Redlands frontage, and that those improvements be in place prior to the project opening. And also, the traffic study identified signal warrants here at Bryn Mawr and Redlands, as well as at this project driveway and Enterprise. When the traffic study was done, it considered a worst-case scenario where traffic movements here were allowed for all directions, including what we call cross-traffic turns, meaning that you could turn out. However, the project has subsequently been modified to be a right turn, right out only, so that the need for this traffic signal at this location is no longer warranted. And to ensure that that happens, there will be a raised median placed here in Redlands Boulevard, so that the only traffic movements that can occur are right in and right out. And that will not disrupt then any traffic movement from Enterprise. And the median plans and improvements along Redland Boulevard were actually approved through engineering back in February. So those will already be in place. I'll just mention too, just for the record, that that from a CEQA standpoint, this does not change the conclusions of the mitigated negative declaration, because the limitation to turning movements actually reduces an impact that would have been there, and so therefore, because that impact has been eliminated, there's no significant change in conclusion by eliminating the traffic signal then. And this project has been vetted before the Planning Commission, and at several meetings, actually, there was an overview presentation given by the applicant back in January to the Planning Commission, and then public hearing for design review opened up on March the 5th, and then finally the environmental document and plan development were considered by the Planning Commission on April the 2nd, at which they forwarded a recommendation of approval to the council. But they did have several comments, and in particular, they wanted to see, it had to do with the intersection area, the driveway that we were just looking at, a desire to see a strong pedestrian access, or at least a functional pedestrian access incorporated in there that was separate from the vehicle drive. Also to look at bringing bicycle access in through that point. And overall, along the perimeter of the site, to ensure that pedestrian crossings along all the driveways were safe, especially as we have the school going in south of the project site. And that related to all of that, to consider the relationship of transit stops off-site and creating pedestrian linkages. And then finally, there was an issue related to the duck pond area, so I'll just go over those briefly. So again, they had a request to coordinate with the transit stops, look at safe driveway crossings, and facilitate convenient access. So these stars represent approximately where existing transit stops are located, but our primary pedestrian access is here, and with the meandering path, we don't have. We need to make sure that we have a strong linkage to the outer extent here. So the idea was to make sure that if transit stop is here, that there's some means for those to have access to enter the site at this point, so that they are not obligated to go all the way down here to come in, and if they don't choose to. You may recall that because we have transit stops throughout the parking area, by providing a pedestrian access here for transit users, they'll be able to utilize the shuttle to get in if they are either unable or choose not to walk. And then along each of the driveway areas, we'll be looking at using pavement, either striped pavement or colored pavement or some pavement markings, and ensuring that the placement of the pathway areas as it comes across the driveways is designed for safety and efficiency as well as convenience. And then finally, within this area, as I said, enhancing the access for both pedestrian and bicycle to link in within the internal pedestrian and bicycle system. Another point that came up is with this southeasterly duck pond area. This is the larger of the two duck ponds. And this was originally intended as a duck pond. This is giving you an example of what it would look like, more of a kind of a natural, quasi-marshy kind of look. There was concern about how to maintain the pond without having stagnant water and odors. I think there was also concern that the large pond might attract the wrong type of bird species, nuisance bird species other than ducks, and as well as water conservation, the desire, what was going to be required to keep that pond filled and how much water would be lost through evapotranspiration. So the applicant came back with a proposal to replace the duck pond area here with another type of treatment or feature, and they're proposing something that's more reminiscent of a dry creek bed with shade trees, trying to build some more shade into this area so that it's, again, can serve as more of an area of reflection. And the Planning Commission desired and requested that that even if we go with a dry creek bed, that there still be some active water feature incorporated into that, either through some type of small fountain area or some type of recirculating water stream. So it would be less intense in terms of water use, but still carry through the water feature as conceptualized in the overall landscape concept. So all of these elements for the water feature, as well as the improved access at the westerly end off Redlands Boulevard and pedestrian connection areas, have all been incorporated into the conditions of approval before you. And I believe in the version that you have, those new conditions are shown in underlined so you can see how the Planning Commission concerns have been addressed. And that brings me to the conclusion of my presentation. And as I mentioned, our traffic engineer is here if you want have specific questions for that, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
I had some just clarification questions. And I will avoid the traffic for a second and just talk about some other aspects, if you don't mind. The size of the street, you called it the, what did you call it? I'm sorry? The Bryn Mawr Street. Is that a 2-lane road or is that a 1-lane road? Does it have a median in the middle?
It has a partial median. I can go back to it. Yeah, you can look at it from that angle too. That was fine. I believe it's 2 lanes in each direction.
Okay, right one. You just passed it.
Did I just pass it?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Right
There, okay. There we go.
All right. I was looking for the regular. Okay.
So there was a little bit of a median. Okay.
4 lanes and a median to keep people
Okay.
from crossing off the you want to force the left hand through the main entrance and not the other entrances there.
And since we're kind of in that general area, what we're approving tonight, we're not doing a site plan for the commercial side of it, correct? We're only dealing for the
Correct.
Okay. Just wanted
This
to
is
say
not
that.
included. And I will say that the street improvements here do allow for future drive. This is the intended driveway for in here to this future area. So what you see here is the possibility for turn lanes, and that's why the median is also reduced in that area.
The reason I ask about the commercial side, because I very much like the landscaping along Rollins Boulevard, and understand it's a buffer. It would be great to try to mimic that as we continue into the commercial area. So something to think about as they're thinking about the next phase for the folks who are paying attention.
I think
Well-
nobody addressed that, when we looked at that open space table, that commercial site will have to carry some open space. And that may be
I understand that. I was just thinking it'd just be nice to make it. What you're showing there is just a little line of trees. I was talking about more of the landscaping with a trail, yeah.
Right.
That's
Well,
what
actually,
I was referring to.
The Bryn Mawr, and this is why I wanted to go back to this, if you look at this cross-section here, there is actually a trail. This here is actually a trail that will serve along here. So a trail system is already built into the improvement plan that was previously approved.
Yeah, but I was referring to along Redlands Boulevard, just the green belt.
In terms of the linear park
Yeah,
you're
exactly.
talking. I
Yes,
got it.
That's what I was referring to. And since we're talking a little bit about park space, I know you mentioned that you have about 5.2 acres of linear park space and about 7.9 of internal. And I know you identify it, but visually, I'm having a hard time seeing how your internal park space far exceeds the linear park. So I guess what I'm asking is, I can understand the large sections you're including, but are you including even the trees that are in between the parking spaces?
No, when she says 5.2 of lineal and the internal brings it up to 7, it's
No,
not
it was an additional
7.
7.9.
Is that correct?
That's what I read.
No, I think it's, yeah.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Trent Thielen with ZGF Architects. I was the
Okay.
site landscape architect for the
Cool.
project. What I think you're trying to get at is what are these internal spaces within the park that the public can access and also the visitors and staff. When you look at sort of the promenade off Redlands, it's a linear park. It's coming straight into the site itself. What is off of those? There are places of respite all along that certain corridor that allow for people to sit, gather, play chess, hang out. What you find across the street here is a lot of people that are visitors and patients, they come for the day. It's not just one appointment. They stay, they look for their buddies, they just look for community. So also with the promenade, we provided a healing garden, is what we're calling it in this area, which is a lot more outdoor seating area. There's actually a small water feature there. There's trellis area. There's trees for shade, so another place for them to gather. When they come around the site, there becomes more areas here around where I call it the old duck pond, but we did another feature within that in our newest edition of the documents, which provides more seating area. We also have a larger area here that allows for larger gatherings. It was part of the VA's intention to have a space. They have one over here at the main hospital, but it's a big sort of blank space. It's a big hardscape with a little bit of shade. What we're trying to provide is a little bit more green space, more sitting areas. They could have a barbecue there, a large gathering that people can get to. The staff themselves have their own sort of gathering spaces back here. You find a lot of healthcare situations. The staff work, long hours. They don't get huge breaks. For them to even get away from the site, just some sort of place that's really close by that they can get to provides a huge amount of healing for
So
them.
I don't want to cut you off, but can you clarify, is the 5.2 acres, when you count that, is that the linear park that I see along the roadway?
Yeah, the 5.52 is basically from the security fence to the road edge, to the right of way, to the property lines.
And am I reading it correctly when it says there's an additional 7.9 acres of internal open space?
Once you start to count sort of how the trail systems link up around the site, and then also there's these smaller sort of areas that we start to get into the site.
So that's an additional 7.9, or is it for a total 7.9?
It's an additional.
That's what I thought, okay. So you are counting some of the trail work?
Yes.
Okay.
Any sort of system where someone can get from Bryn Mawr or Redlands into the site. There's a lot of different access ways, and also from the parking lot itself, they turn into sort of a circuitous pathway system that we can use for rehab or for people just to get away from the site.
And then the other question I had, as far as the trees,
Yes, sir.
I know in your conceptual pictures you showed large trees. Are you actually going to be planting trees of that size, or are you going to wait 30 years before they get to
We are using a minimum size of 36-inch boxes right now, which is about a 3-inch caliper tree, which is a really good, aggressive sort of tree to start with for a site. There are over 660 trees for the site itself that have been planned for.
So the orange groves, because I know that for example, over on Mission, they said, well, we're building some orange trees. Well, 10 years later, you can even, they're just basically like bushes. They're not
No,
even
no, no,
orange
they will
trees.
not be
Okay.
bushes.
So
This
they
is
are-
one of the most important features of this site is to getting shade. This area is intense sun.
Does
So-
that apply for the Orange Grove section?
The Orange Grove section, yeah. So those trees, we're using the recommended tree list from Loma Linda and also from working on projects at Redlands, the University of Redlands, using their sort of what has worked really well. We don't want to really necessarily use a traditional orange tree because the branches all come down to the ground, and that provides not really the safety. We're trying to provide a canopy for shade and relief, and that there's good sight lines so people can't hide back there. We've put an extensive tree list down that the city's starting to review right now for our permitting, and I think you'll see a very good deciduous tree canopy that will grow in.
And I know you didn't address it at this level, but is there fairly good lighting in the park area for nighttime when everything's closed and people are walking in the area?
We have done light level checks. It will not be a bright
No,
sort
no.
of thing, but yes, there will be low levels, that there will be some lighting, especially along the pathways along Bryn Mawr and Redlands. Those are going to have bollard lighting, I believe, within them, or the lights in the parking lot will have enough light out there.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions that aren't.
You bet.
And I do have some other, so I'll just finish all my questions, so get it out of the way.
I just remember the traffic signal, the intersection of Redlands and Mountain View. If you have enough traffic, we can do protective permissive left turn at all the lakes.
Another question I had is there any talk about putting solar on top of the roof? That's a large roof area.
Solar.
Oh,
I can answer that. Right now, with the way the budget is, we looked at that and it's still an ongoing conversation. With the right sort of grant money or the right sort of companies approach the clients, I'm sure they would do that. It's all over within your community right now, and I think it's a very good option.
and now I have a bunch of traffic-related questions. So I don't know if that's the traffic guy wants to come up. And you may know the answer to this, you may not know, but I looked inside the staff report and it says that their direct impact was $470,000 and their fair share was $70,000. Can someone explain that to me? For traffic impact fees, they said it was $470,000, but yet their fair share is only $70,000.
Correct.
I just want to understand why their impact would be $750 and why they would only be paying $70.
The other improvements, well, a lot of them were listed through the Nexus fee program through Sandbag that we talked, the regional fee program. And the fair share is based on numerator, denominator, and it's only new traffic. And their peak hours are not in the traditional peak hours because, as you know, hospital personnel come off peak hours traditionally. And so their fair share, for instance, at Mountain View at Redlands was 20%, but 20% of 170,000.
Okay. I read and it talked about the fact that about 450 people are being moved from the existing VA to the new one. Do you not anticipate a decrease in traffic at Mountain View and Barton Road with all these patients who at one time were going to the VA, now going to the different area? I guess I just didn't see that depicted in the traffic study. Am I missing it?
That is correct. We were conservative in our analysis, and
Okay.
we did not account for a negative.
Okay.
But the majority of these personnel will be moving from other portions of the
But
city.
as far as patient traffic, do we have any idea as to how many people who would otherwise go to the existing VA now go to the new one?
We treated the entire project as a new project.
Right.
So all traffic generated is new traffic.
Oh, really?
So we
Okay.
don't treat anything as a recycling or removal of traffic. So what you're seeing is if we built a brand new facility and the existing facility continued as is. So we took a worst case scenario without trying to make assumptions of this will be reduced, this will be added. We said this is the absolute
Okay.
worst, and we'll go from there.
And I know that you're addressing lots of intersections, but given the size of this project, are we making any effort to renew our efforts to, not to be redundant, of fixing California and Redlands Boulevard? That's a significant
Yeah, we
problem.
have many meetings on that, and we continue to talk about it. And the reason for that is, I think I have to come to the city council to make a decision on that intersection, because half of it is in the city of Redlands, and many conversations I have with them is not on top of their priority. So we might end up have to bite the bullet and do the improvement ourselves, be a lead agency and have some sort of agreement that they will reimburse us way later.
Weren't we looking at some type of federal
Yeah,
help
that's
or
what I was
assistance with that?
referring
And I actually think it'll probably be really good to have a large federal agency in our corner on this thing once it's all said and done,
As in the VA.
in the VA.
We were lucky enough to get the federal fund for widening the Mountain View Bridge.
That was the past. We're talking about the future.
Well, but the problem is, since then, the federal broke. That right now they don't have any money to do the freeway, try to get the grant. So Sandbag been funding a lot of freeway improvement themselves. So
And-
we have been trying to get the federal fund, yes.
And since we're talking about money, and this has nothing to do with you, but do we have some idea as to the overall cost of the project and the amount of property tax that the city may generate as a result of it?
The cost for
The full project?
There's some idea of what the property tax revenue would be. We're estimating it's about a $100 million project. The city gets 11% of 1% of that is what, yeah, love it, right?
So this building is only going to cost $100 million, that's it? That seems awfully
But
small.
You want to pay more, Don? Okay.
That seems awfully small amount for a 300,000 square foot building.
That works out to somewhere about $300 a foot.
Okay.
So it's consistent with medical use. What that brings in is about $110,000 a year. However, that was on former redevelopment land, so ultimately that 110 will get divvied out. The school district will get a slice. Every taxing entity will get a slice of that. So what our final cut will be, I don't know. We're going to get a cut of 110.
I noticed there was a cafeteria in there. Is that open to the public for anybody to go eat?
Yes.
And is that some retail, or is that considered retail as far as generating any income?
Oh, I don't know in terms of
Any
taxation
any
for
retail sales, cafeteria, or ancillary sales, gift shops, or whatever else will be sales tax. That's a privately owned building leased to the federal government, so it's not exempt from anything.
And I guess my last final question is, when do we anticipate doing a groundbreaking of some sort for this project?
Hi, I'm Don Wetzel with Walsh Investors. We're WI Loma Linda. Thank you for hearing this evening. Right now, we're looking probably mid-June. We're trying to get everyone scheduled together with the Congress people and the VA to try to really put on a pretty large ceremony. So all of you will get your invites, and we hope you're all in attendance.
I just want to make sure that I'm out of town June 18th through 22, so make sure
Hey,
it's not
those
then.
are bad days.
then that's perfect for you. Trust me.
Just to let you know, the Public Works already approved all the off-site improvement, street, water, sewer, storm drain off-site. We also approved the rough grading plan, so as soon as they have their finance available, they can come over and pull the permit.
And structural and foundation is in the final step of plan check, so we expect that approved in the next couple of days.
Thank you. That was my questions.
Thank you.
Just while you're there, as a follow-up, if we start in June, what's the timetable for completion, do you estimate?
We're actually anticipating probably closing in the next few weeks with our landholders, Lewis. All bank funds have already been situated for this. We're going through relationship banks out of Chicago, so it's fully funded pending approvals. So essentially, we'd start doing grubbing and rough grading probably mid-May. Our anticipated date to go vertical would be probably within 3 months when steel arrives. And then we've got an aggressive schedule to basically have opening right now. The date is March 14th, 2016. The grand opening will probably be 30 to 60 days after that, after all the equipment goes in and we kick the tires for a few months.
Very good.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
No, I've got a few too, but you did ask some good questions. This is probably more of a comment than a question. I don't know how anyone would be able to respond to it, but I remember when the Pettis VA opened up, we had duck ponds and parks and parking and trees all over. I mean, it looked like a park all around the hospital. Now it's a parking lot, period, and they've expanded and expanded. Has there been, and I guess the question, if there is one, is how carefully has the VA considered matching this facility with the Pettis Hospital to be sure that they plan for the future, so that we don't start seeing this become, what will happen to this is what happened with the VA hospital.
Well, the city, or
this
not the
hospital
ci-
looks nothing like it did when they opened it. I'll tell you that.
I fully agree with you. I wasn't there, obviously, but I'm sure it didn't. And that's just, I think what happened with that is they didn't realize how inundated with, patients they were going to get. And that's unfortunate, but that's what happened lately. The VA, when they were planning this building out, was very aggressive on their parking. I mean, just to design what we had to design to meet their parking needs, which they expected as their maximums, that's what you see is what you get. There's no other room on that site for parking. It meets their city standards with tree canopies, your aisle widths, and your parking spaces. So if they need more parking, they're going to have to build a structure at this point, and they don't expect to be building a structure on the site. I mean,
and I guess I want to turn to our planning guy. You agree with that in terms of the number of people that are going to be coming in here? Because the VA's parked all over Loma Linda. I mean, neighborhoods and Barton Road and every place.
The challenge we have with the VA is that's not in the city. It's a federal reservation, and we have no control over what they do there. This building is in the city. So if they want to add, they got to come and go through the Planning Commission, go through you guys for any additions or changes, the same as any other building. And then there would give local control to what happens to that site. Additionally, Trent said was talking about parking. We're overparked by over 500 spaces to what the site requires based on the footprint.
That's good
of
news.
use.
Okay.
So there is some capacity there, but once again, you as a council will have control on what happens there, not see it when it hits the skyline.
And when you talked about the all of the trees, the impression I had is you're going to have a whole variety of different kinds of trees in there, and we'll get to see a list of that as well.
absolutely. There's probably at least, I think, 30 different types of trees, I think, is what was my final sort of palette I used. It'll sort of adjust as we kind of get feedback from people, and then also, if the nurseries can actually supply that many. That's always the question that you're finding right now, especially with the construction booms. But no, there will not be a monoculture of trees. It's a very good variety. We're trying to actually sort of build up the tree palettes per sort of the parking areas so that people can identify the parking areas by the tree type that they're in, just as a way for wayfinding.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, it's massive. This is a big site. There's a lot of, you can get lost out there.
Try not to let the tree count go to 666. You said it's...
Oh, I said, it's 660.
Just over 660.
No, we're not going to that number.
Okay.
Absolutely not. Sorry.
Our mayor always has a sense of humor about these things. Also, at the main entrance, you showed a fountain, but it looked more like a pool to me. Is there going to be moving water there?
Yeah, it's basically a spillway, almost like an infinity type sort of fountain.
So there'll be an elevated pool
that spills in and then spills
lower
again.
pool.
So it just kind of recycles the water and tends to spill it. So you get the sounds, you get the movement, but it's not a real vigorous sort of thing because this is a area of healing, contemplation. We're just trying to.
And I like that. I'm trying to figure out why the planning commission's worried about a little duck pond when you've got a big fountain. But
It's in your city code. So we're trying to deal with all the sort of ins and outs and trying to meet everything. But we have some really good the features out here. I think would be quite dynamic for the area.
Has
and
the
then
building?
final,
I'm sorry.
The final question I have is the Lineal Park, as I understood it, is going to be a public park. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Who's going to maintain that and provide security?
The landowner.
So this will be part of the VA security and
Yes.
landscaping.
Well, it's not the VA. It'll be Walsh
Well,
Investments.
yes.
Yes, they're the landowner. They have to maintain the whole sort of.
And since it's
the
in the
site.
city, it's not, I mean, VA police will be there as security officers, but it will be under the sheriff's jurisdiction for anything that happens there. That's
So does that mean we're
Part
going
of
to
the city.
need to add additional patrol car? Yeah, I see. Here we go.
Job creation.
Yeah.
Just curious, was there a building built exactly like this someplace else?
Sorry, say it
Was
again.
there a building built just like this someplace else?
You know, they've been doing several of these facilities throughout the United States, these sort of lease agreements. I think size-wise, this is
Okay.
unique. This is
Okay.
one of the biggest ones.
All right.
My final comment is I want to compliment you on what is a beautiful plan, and this was a comprehensive presentation, and I really appreciate it. I'm excited about the project.
Well, I want to compliment the city. Worked really well with us when we had some sort of issues coming up about the linear park and stuff. Everybody kind of got together and we hashed out a thing. I think it's going to be a great asset for the community
I
for
agree.
years to come.
I agree. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bill, anything? I just wanted to make a comment about the history. I've recently become acquainted with our second mayor. The city was incorporated in 1970, and our second mayor served from 1974 to 1979 when the original VA structure was going in. No, it was Dickinson. The first mayor was Doug Welliver. The second was Kent Dickinson. And he talks about, and I think the memories have faded on this, but apparently there was an awful lot of controversy with the first VA structure coming in, and its nature as a federal reservation cut the city out on everything with regard to the planning, and there was no provision for extra police, no provision for the fire, and eventually we worked out those details. But at the time, it was considered to be quite a disruptive thing in a small town. So it's kind of nice to see this time that everything is very cooperative and it's not, there's no hiding behind the reservation. So I think it's a very good project for our city. Now, when we have a lot of not-for-profits in this town, and one of the ways that the Loma Linda University Medical Center offsets its impacts on our police and fire is that they buy a lot of their supplies and things through a mercantile and get a point of sale in Loma Linda so that we get sales tax revenue. So you guys might want to. You're doing something like that?
Yeah, well, once again, this is a private project, so they're paying full freight on all the taxes. In addition to that, there is provision through the state tax code that certain portions of the project that are over actually it's a fairly large dollar amount, we can, and Walsh has agreed to work with us on that, to create Loma Linda as a point of sale for those materials. Usually it's concrete and steel and those type of things, so that we'll get the sales tax on that as well. Mm-hmm. And we're working with our sales tax consultant to set that up, and they've been very open and eager to be involved in that.
Mm-hmm. As far as the supply of the building, I don't know if there are any VA people here, but does it get all of its supplies through GSA, or do they buy things on the open market, or nobody knows? Yeah.
My name is Pachi Asher. I'm the Assistant Director of the Loma Linda VA Medical Center. The way this project goes is, yes, this is a private building that we're leasing back. However, the operations within the medical ambulatory care center are still federal, and per federal regulations, we are not allowed to go out onto the open market. So we do have to follow our own acquisition regulations, GSA, and so forth.
I was afraid of that. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, any other comments?
I'd like to make one more comment on the park, and to really on what Trent's done and the whole architectural team is when we started with this, we told them we wanted a lineal park, and we have all kinds of active spaces in the city for kids and baseball, which you guys are painfully aware of, and soccer fields. And what we really looked for was a place, since Loma Linda is a blue zone, where the Blues can go and have a park and a place to do things. So although this isn't basketball courts and those type of really high-impact things, they've done a really great job of creating a space that somebody that is still active and wants to be outside but is not, climbing rock walls or running marathons, still has some place to do and be active.
One question, and that was, what are the projected hours of operation of the facility? Is it? I'm guessing now 24. Is that city managers mentioned that to me?
No, it's very regimented. It's 9 to 7 weekdays, and on Saturday only 9 to 5.
Because I actually would imagine that there's. Yeah. Okay. Then that actually opens up a lot of the park space more towards the residents of the town, because I don't know. A little bit of trepidation when I say this, that I saw one of the buildings was a mental health facility, and I'm not so certain, I'm not sure what types of people that will attract, or whether or not they'll be milling around in the parks.
Well, I think just services, it's really, healthcare based, not really, there's no for night stays, there's no serious psychiatric type work that'll go there, so it's really clinic based. In our projections over the 20-year term, because we'll be owning and operating the facility, is we were very careful to make sure we had the proper staff to handle all of the, it's basically, like if you think of it as a medical clinic, the VA is a tenant internally for their functions, but all of the standard building operations will be done by Walsh and Walsh Investors, basically third-party engineers and our operating group. And we currently run about 5 facilities for the U.S. government, everything from FBI buildings to FAA facilities. This will be our largest VA facility, so we're very well versed in taking care of federal tenants within the areas, and we've gotten high marks from those clients over the years. I encourage people to talk to some of the people. The first building we did was 19 years ago in Detroit, and that building is still a gold star building within the Detroit area, Energy Star rated, still 19 years after that was built for the IRS, and that was a very tough customer. So we're looking forward to actually enjoying tenancy with the VA over the 20-year period.
I was just going to make some comments on this project. Has been a long time coming. I remember when the head of the VA talked about the need for it, and I really wanted to commend the staff, especially Conrad, because he and I have been talking about this for 4 to 5 years, and initially we said that this would be a good area for this, and the VA wasn't quite sure about it. And then we had letters from Dr. Hart, a number of folks from the university, pointing out how important it is to have the facility within Loma Linda, given the amount of residencies that go through those buildings. And it took a lot of effort. We at one point thought this project was going to go to Redlands. I remember being on the phone with the folks in D.C., and to this day I still recall actually being on a beach in St. Thomas, emailing staff in Jerry Lewis's office when he was about to meet with the head of the VA to lobby for this project to stay in Loma Linda. And it actually ended up being kind of a little bit by accident, but obviously we lobbied hard, and it came to fruition. So we're very thankful, and I really want to commend Conrad, because without his effort in this, I think this project could have gone someplace else, and it was critical that we keep it in Loma Linda for many, many reasons. So thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from the council? Then I'll open the public hearing. Does the public wish to speak on this topic? It's a lot more placid than 40 years ago. No public comment, so I'll close the public hearing. And then we'll need instruction on how to phrase the motions.
There isn't a motion. Just a one by one.
You can do it however you would like to do it. You can do it one at a time, or you can do it all as a group.
Okay.
Council's pleasure.
I'll go ahead and move the outpatient healthcare facility operated by the U.S. Department of Medical Affairs, including a 5.2-acre linear park and 2,035 on-site parking spaces on 36.9 acres at 26001 Redlands Boulevard, which includes item A, which would be the mitigated negative declaration, item B, which would be the mitigation monitoring report, item C, Council Bill 0-201407 for first reading on today, and then second reading from May the 13th, 2014, and also item number D, which would be a precise plan of design number 13-127 for the construction of the three-story structure, totaling 345,000 square feet. I think that should conclude all of them.
Okay. Is there support for the motion?
Second.
Okay, is there any discussion? Okay, then all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any votes no, say no. Okay, looks like it's unanimous. We've approved the aforementioned list of actions. Items A, B, C, and D. And we have set it for a second reading for May 13, so it's not done yet, part of it. But is the mitigated negative done? Is everything else done? It's just the one that requires a second reading.
See.
Okay. So it looks like you're 3/4 of the way there. Yeah. Okay, then we will move to our next item, the consent calendar.
I move the consent calendar.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. It's unanimous. The consent calendar has been approved. Are there any reports of councilmen?
We had the long-awaited grand opening or grand beginning celebration of the SBX line. So we hope that that provides an efficient and environmentally sound way for people to travel in and out of our city, and hopefully it'll help reduce some of the traffic. Time will tell. But this has been a challenging project and a long time coming, so it's exciting. And the VA is the anchor location in Loma Linda, so we're excited about that.
And that SBX project costs twice as much as this huge VA facility, and for a bus line. So it's kind of amazing. It shows how much it costs to condemn property. It's not a good business. Better to buy a green field. So, okay. Any other comments? Any reports of officers? Okay, then City Council is adjourned. We have 2 more meetings for those of you who want to stay for some exciting stuff. We'll be done in about another 30 seconds, so hang tight. The successor agency, are there any items to be added or deleted?
No, sir.
Would the public like to speak on any items not on the agenda? I hear none. The consent calendar is available.
Move it.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no. It's my opinion, it's unanimous. We've approved the demands register, and that meeting is adjourned. Then we open the meeting of the Housing Authority. Are there any items to be added or deleted?
No, sir.
Would the public like to speak on any items not on the agenda? I see no comments. The consent calendar, demands register.
Move the consent calendar.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. It's unanimous. Are there any chair, we've approved the demands register. Are there any chair and member reports? Any reports of officers? Okay, then we're adjourned. What was it, 42 seconds?
55 seconds.
We tried. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.